Did you all know that Queen Elizabeth has been the Queen of England for well over 60 years? You know, I'm an American, and yet there is a certain solidness that I feel because of that. Today we're going to do just briefly a story about, and part of this story is that there was a king, King Uzziah, who had been the king of Israel for 52 years. And while he was the king, they had been blessed economically, militarily, pretty much every way but spiritually. And this is where our story starts. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. He was high and lifted up and seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. And above him stood seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory. And that's our story from God's word. Hey, I wonder, what do you think it might have been like to have been a prophet for a nation who had had one ruler your entire lifetime, and now all of a sudden that ruler was gone? What do you think Isaiah might have felt like? Think he might have been depressed? Think he could have been concerned for the future of his nation? Yeah, I mean, remember what we talked about just a moment ago, that while this Uzziah had been king, the nation had been blessed in many, many different ways. Well, let's look at the first part of that story. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and lifted up. I'm curious. This vision that God gave Isaiah, do we learn anything about God from the timing of his being allowed to see God on the throne? I wonder, do you think that might show God's concern for the way that Uzziah was feeling, or maybe even for the doubts he was having? I wonder if it shows anything about God's knowledge of what Isaiah might have been dealing with emotionally or mentally, for that matter. What might we learn about God's concern for Isaiah during this time of emotional, mental need? Does it tell us anything about his personality? I mean, did God have other choices? Could he have responded in a different way? You know, I'm thinking he could have just lectured Uzziah, appeared to him in a dream and said, or lectured Isaiah, appeared to him in a dream and said, you know, dude, what are you thinking? I'm God. Trust in me. But instead, he let Isaiah see him in a position of authority and glory. What might that show us about God and his concern for Isaiah as an individual? I'm curious what we might learn about God from the fact that he is in this position. I mean, do you see a contrast between the God of the universe and a good king who reigned for a long time? I mean, is there anything really? Is there much of a comparison? 52 years is a long time, but I mean, do you sense a permanency by the vision that God allowed Isaiah to see? We're going to look later at some of the rest of this story, but I'm curious. In this story, we essentially saw God's concern for Isaiah, for his mental state, for his emotional state, over the changes he saw in the nation, over the fears he saw in his nation. I wonder today, do you think God still is still concerned about his people and the emotional trauma, the mental trauma they might be going through when they see changes taking place in their nation? And specifically, I'm speaking for the United States, and goodness gracious, this has been a ride, hasn't it? I mean, the election is still over a month away, and yet it's just crazy. Regardless of who wins the presidential election, there are going to be a lot of changes in this country. A lot of people are going to be pleased, and a lot of people are going to be miserable, one way or the other. I wonder if we might learn anything from Isaiah. I wonder if we might learn anything from God. I mean, today, is God showing us anything that could help us in times like that? Is he still seated on that throne? Is he still permanent compared to the wind is blowing around behind me. I'm not sure if you can hear it through the speaker. I'm under an awning here, but our lives are but a vapor. I wonder, in this story, seeing God's concern for one man and his emotions, and how God met that concern, I wonder how that might help us in the future, especially in the near future, as the election comes and goes, and God's still on his throne. Just something to think about, just a thought for the future. But until the next time, we'll do some more of this story. Try to do a couple of verses here and there, just to show you can do a story in a very short period of time. So, God bless. Keep on telling those stories.